This episode is part of the EUTERPE podcast series on European literatures and gender from a transnational perspective.
Okay, hello everyone. This is EUTERPE podcast library. My name is Tamara Cvetković, and I'm very honored to present you my guest, Olja Alvir, who is a literary scholar, a writer, a translator, a journalist, social media personality as well. And I want to talk about all of these things with her. So, Olja, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Maybe for the beginning, we can decide to talk about one of your professional or personal personalities. I didn't want to make a long introduction. I wanted to get there through conversation. So I met you as a literary scholar at the Conference of South Slavic Studies. And in your scholarly work, you are mostly working with Yugoslav partisan film.
Exactly.
Can you tell us something about your scholarly work for the beginning?
Of course. So I studied German literature and comparative literature. And now I am researching Yugoslav partisan film, which is already quite a scope. So even in my research, I'm doing many different things. And why I'm interested in partisan film, first of all, I fell in love with it when I first saw it. I wasn't exposed to Yugoslav film a lot as a child because I grew up in Austria. I was born in Yugoslavia before the war, and then in 1992 my family came to Austria. So I do not have this experience of watching old partisan movies on TV on holidays or something. And my the first time I was exposed to them was at uni because I just looked for courses that were about Yugoslavia. And then I saw my first partisan film, which was Slavica, which is the first Yugoslav film ever made, the first socialist Yugoslav film. And I was like, great, this is it. I love this. And what I like about it is that partisan films are very diverse and complicated and span also many genres.
Yes.
And I'm concentrating on the early films because they are usually thought of as not so good. Mm-hmm. And I always like to try to do the unexpected and work on the things that are not cool and not trendy and not everyone's favorites. And I want to show that they still have value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now when you say that, my experience with partisan movies is exactly that. Like watching partisan films with my father.
So. Yeah.
Yeah. During holidays, and we always have these very nice. Even though we watched all of them many times, we still like to comment on it or to find some new things that we didn't notice before. Mm-hmm. So yeah, this is very, very interesting how we have this sort of difference in this experience.
Exactly.
But when you say early films and that they are not considered very good, you mean in terms of that they're perceived as propaganda?
Exactly. They are mostly perceived as state-sponsored propaganda films, and they are also seen as artistically of lesser value, which is an unfair statement. There are loads of films, and they vary in quality, I would say, but there are also very good films in the 40s and 50s.
So yeah, you're actually doing this excavation work of taking something from the deep down dirt of garbage, as you said once, right?
Yes. I wrote this in an article called Queer Offizier. That this is the work of diving into the dustbin of literature or of public opinion and looking for the sparkly pearls that might still be there.
Nice. I want to hear something more. So, if I'm not wrong, you did your MA thesis in comparative literature, and you were also dealing with partisan film. Am I right?
Yes. So I already worked on partisan film during my master's, and this is part of the journey of how I got to this topic. And it was already on movement in partisan film. So I was looking at, and this is also something that interests me in my dissertation, but I was looking at the patterns of movement in partisan film, how the characters move through landscape, how different categories of characters, enemies, friends, collaborators, spies, ideological enemies, they all have their own movement patterns. So when you watch a partisan film, you can always already tell who is going to be the traitor, because the partisans are always on foot, they're always marching and walking, and they are taking no shortcuts, they are not motorized, and the enemy is always either in a car, on a motorcycle, or sometimes like dubious characters will be on a bicycle, because the bicycle somehow has like this bourgeois urban quality to it. So actually this is a maybe nice detail of one of the most well-known partisan films, Walter Brani Sarajevo. Without even knowing about the plot or having to see the whole 2-hour movie, you can tell, because it's like a spy movie with double and triple spies, and I don't know, you can tell who is going to be the false partisan from the beginning, because that person is in a car. So
okay, so there are
it spoils you the plot, but it's very interesting how stringent this is.
Okay, so your MA thesis was actually analysis of these movements. Okay, now, I have several ideas, but maybe we can turn to one direction now precisely, because you got an award for this thesis.
Yes.
Right? And I wanted to ask you, because you got also several awards, so maybe we can comment a bit about this award that you got for your MA thesis, and then maybe we can move further to literary awards that you got, and then maybe we can start and open this other topic of your literary career.
Yes, thank you. I love to talk about this. This is very good for my ego. I don't think about this in everyday life. You don't walk around and you're like, I got this award for my master thesis. So thank you for reminding me. Yes, I got an award from the Austrian Society for Slavic Studies, which awards masters and theses and dissertations every 2 years. And they awarded my master's thesis for its analytic quality, but also in the what is it called? The speech where they explain the reasons for the award. They also highlighted the writing style and that it was very lively and interesting to read, which was a huge compliment for me, because I always try to make academic writing interesting to read. I think that academic writing needs to be good writing. It not only needs to be methodologically sound, and the work must have been done and all of these things, of course, but it has to be a pleasure to read. I'm really convinced of that, and I always try to do that in all of my writing. So that's what I tried in the MA thesis, and it was so nice to hear that people could see that. I was very happy.
That somebody actually appreciates that.
Yes. Because it's always problematic, because sometimes in academic writing, it seems like making it sound more complicated will make the writer sound more intelligent. And this is something that is been criticized by feminist scholars for at least 50 years, but it still hasn't really, not everyone has, I think, gotten the memo.
Yeah, true. Even in our feminist circles,
Absolutely.
it is still not something that is pretty common.
Yes.
So now I'm interested. So your thesis was written in German, but
Yes.
you also write in Serbo-Croatian and English. So can you comment a bit on these differences between languages in which you use and in which you write?
Yes, it is a very complex topic for me, and I'm also only finding out new things about it now or every day maybe. So one recent thing that I realized, maybe I will start with this anecdote and then try to say something general, is that I'm now writing a new novel, and I just couldn't really get into the sound of this character's perspective that I'm writing. And it's in German. So the novel in the end will be in German, I guess, hopefully, maybe, I don't know, or something like German. And I just, it just didn't work. I had writer's block. And then I thought, but what if I just try it in English and then I can translate back to German? And suddenly I got into the flow. And I don't know what the problem is or what the obstacle is that one can overcome by switching languages, but obviously that might be a technique for some people. For me, it is. And then I just started writing in English, and then I translated it into German, and suddenly I had found like the tone or the sound of this character's thoughts. So this is one of the ways in which my languages interfere or maybe work together. I don't know how I would say that. Another thing is that it's quite maybe weird to write about Yugoslav topics in German academically, because who's gonna read that? Who's gonna be interested in that? But there are enough scholars of Yugoslav culture who understand German, but maybe English would be smarter. But then on the other hand, you make the topics accessible to a specific group of people. And I think, for example, of my students who would not understand it in English maybe, if academic sources are in English. The students here in Vienna, at the University of Vienna, where I worked, that maybe would have not been accessible to them. So everything has its upsides and downsides. And maybe something that you were alluding to is the creative writing. And in creative writing, all of my languages kind of mix together. And I'm not even really trying to separate them too much anymore, because I think it's, on one hand, it's gotten more and more, maybe even trendy, especially in poetry, which I write a lot, but also it's just my authentic voice. It's always a mix of languages. Even when we are talking right now, it's very, very hard for me, even though it's easy to talk to you, but to not mix all the time and put in like Serbo-Croatian or BCS words. And when we talk in BCS, I'm constantly saying something in English and so on. So yeah.
I think we can do it also here, and then we will just translate these parts for our audience. Yeah, I was thinking about creative writing, but I was also thinking like in terms that you work as a translator as well. And I have this information that you are working with Austrian Film Museum with subtitling. So like different media and then different languages. I was just like interested to hear you talking about this switching and translating, and how translation helps you in your creative writing and vice versa. And what else? I mean, you can comment on that. Yeah.
This is already a huge topic. So translation, to me, I'm not as eloquent in talking about the work of translation as translators who do it full time. They are very knowledgeable and quick on their feet and everything about that. But I can say, as I have translated literary works and subtitles, is that translation is a fantastic tool and portal to creativity. So people who have not tried to translate something, they might think that the job of translation is to create the original in new language, which is not the thing, which is not what translators do. Translators create a new text which in and of itself has creative qualities and always also has the translator's handwriting all over it. So there is this transfer or transformation that happens in translation that is always something that is at the same time less than the original and more than the original. So I always hate when people talk about what is lost in translation, but we have to look at what is gained in translation. And maybe another anecdote to illustrate this is I used to, and I still do, I still translate a lot of poetry. This is what I'm specialized in, apart from film subtitles. So every way of translating has its own rules, really, and they are not all the same. And when translating poetry, which is very hard because sometimes you have to get the rhymes right even, or the line length, or the rhythm, or all of it at the same time, which can be really complex and feel impossible to do. When I translate poetry, I often have like 5 or 10 versions of a verse. I just write all of them down to see what I have there, and then I pick the best one or the one that goes best with the next line or something. So there is a lot of, I don't want to say byproduct, but there's a lot of excess that happens when translating. And this is actually how I first started writing poetry myself. I was translating poems by Katja Grcic, a Split-born author. And I was just kind of freestyling some things on the side. And then I thought, this is not the translation of her poem, but this is interesting as well. And then somehow that was like one word or one line, and somehow that developed into its own poem. So I'm also thankful to Katja for kickstarting this.
Your poetry, actually.
Yeah, my poetry. But yes, this is just one example of how translation is really a portal to many creative outlets, I think.
Yeah, that's very interesting to hear. Because I was listening to you speaking at some other event, and then I was like, okay, so you actually, as you said, you have these byproducts, and then you collect them and have a lot of materials, and then you make them new poems, actually. So I wanted to talk about your poetry as well. So you have a collection of poetry, Spielfeld?
Yes, Spielfeld, yes.
Maybe also what unites them in a one collection.
Well, I would say I had no other option than to do it in 3 languages, because I had written in all of these languages, and if I had to choose one, for example, let's say German, because it's an Austrian publisher who probably would have been interested to publish German language poems, then it probably wouldn't have been enough for a whole collection, and it also wouldn't have been the whole picture. I guess I realized that some topics I write more in German and others more in English. I think I write identity-based things, meditations, mostly in German. But these are not general rules, but
Okay.
I'd say like mostly. And then love poems are in English for some reason. I don't know. Then there are miscellaneous things in Serbo-Croatian. So if I take any of these languages out, then there is something missing. And I was really fortunate that my publisher agreed to do all of them, and also to not do the usual way of publishing where you have every poem on one side of the page and the translation on the opposite side, which does happen in my collection, but not always. Some poems are not translated, which I also like. I like that. I like when literature does not give me all the answers and is not kind of treating me like a baby, treating me like an adult who can look up things on their own. Or I also just like to... We like songs in languages that we don't understand. Why shouldn't we maybe also appreciate a few lines of poetry where we're not sure what it means semantically, but we can maybe feel what it means rhythmically or from the sound?
Yes, so interesting, so interesting. And this thing that you said about there would be something missing if you didn't have all of three languages. It is because all of these languages are yours in some way. So you had your education in German and in English,
Yes.
and in Serbo-Croatian, and your life as well.
Yes, true. Yes, I went to, this was very formative for me that I went to a bilingual school where we had all subjects in German and in English, which is for that time in Austria was not very usual. You have these international schools in Vienna, of course, as Vienna is also like a city, where the children of diplomats go and get their education in English. But this school was very weird in the fact that we had everything in both languages. So in 1 week, we would learn about the cow's 4 stomachs in German, and then the next week, the test on these would be in English. Or we would learn about geology and volcanoes with our English substitute teacher, who was a geologist. And then in the next week, we would learn about global economy in German. So it was all like maybe even kind of a mess now that I look back on it. But it was very formative, and it brought all of us, or most of us, to a level of English where you could confidently move through the education system in English as well. So yeah, and also made us susceptible to English-speaking media, of course, as adults.
Okay, thank you for that. I was wondering also about, because this podcast and our project, as you know, we had a lot of these conversations, is about transnational authors and let's say transcultural experiences. So maybe one of the reasons why you're here is also your experience of growing up and living in Austria and coming from some other context, such as Yugoslavia, or a country that doesn't exist anymore. I'm wondering, I mean, I know that you were a child when you arrived here, but still, I'm interested, like, did you feel like belonging is always something that bothers us. So, like, did you feel like you belonged to some of these societies? How do you find yourself in the middle of everything?
Yes, thank you for this question. This is a great question, and please stop me if I start rambling, because I have too much to say on this.
Okay, I will stop you, but please continue. I want to hear.
So I recently realized that as a child, I did not know that, for a long time, I did not know that I was different. that I was a migrant, because I went to this prestigious school, and my otherness manifested mostly in me being a girl, being a woman, and being interested in not the things that women should be interested in, and being good at math and loving physics. And this
we'll
was,
get back to it.
Yes.
I have questions about physics as well.
Oh, amazing. Okay. Yes. So that was my first experience of not belonging. And then when I became a teenager, I realized that there were class differences between me and other people in my class, where I realized, what? These people have a cleaning lady and a cook, and my mom works as a cleaning lady. Something is like different here. And when I went to visit my friends' houses, they had houses.
They had houses.
And somehow, I, as a teenager, I was very like an emo teenager, and kind of depressed, and I don't know, in my feelings. But I think that one of the reasons for that was this sudden realization that I was really different. And that not all of these options that were open to my peers were open to me as a woman, as a migrant, as a person with a weird name, frankly, or like a name that Austrians can't. So this is my firsts of being different. And then, of course, as I grew up, I slowly started to realize that my family also viewed me as an other, because I had switched to German as the main language. My family, also my parents and me, we used to speak in German at home, just as the Austrian right-wing fascist politicians want. Like, we totally integrated, we totally assimilated, we all learned German perfectly, and we did not even speak our own language at home. Like, the perfect picture.
The perfect picture of a well-integrated migrant.
Exactly, yes. So I had lost a lot of language competency in my mother tongue, or my first language, through this process. And when speaking to my family, they would sometimes ridicule me or laugh at the way I speak, or the grammatical mistakes that I made, of course. And there was this classic thing of neither here nor there, neither belonging to your new home or nor your old home. So that was also something that I felt way into my 20s or something. But now I'm happy that you brought in this transnational term, because I want to say something about it, but first I would like to ask you maybe to define, if you can, your view of this term. Because I'm not sure that I'm a fan.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so yeah, I understand, and I think with the term transnational, it is actually in the title of our project that should signalize that we are dealing with a particular kind of literature. So we are not doing monolingual stuff, let's say. So I think it was a useful term to signalize like what the project is doing. But yeah, and even within our project, like, we have different views on what transnational should mean. And also for me personally, yeah, I'm not sure that I can speak in terms like of whether I'm a fan of the term or not, but I'm just trying to work with it in the ways that are useful to me. So let's maybe put it that way. So I would say, like, of course, migration is something that is just a very ordinary human activity. So there is nothing new about migration in this contemporary world. But since we are dealing with the contemporary literature on migration, what I think distinguishes transnational literature is contemporary state of being as a migrant in this world, this world with borders, with boundaries, with surveillance, with nation states that are constantly trying to assimilate you or make you a proper citizen, or migrants are their laboratory to discipline citizens.
Yes.
So when I talk about transnational literature, I'm talking about these effects the nation state has on the citizens or non-citizens that are migrant within their community. And this literature is something that reflects these experiences. I mean, this is my
That makes a lot of sense. Yes, I like that. It is more of like an analysis of the effects of the nation state disciplining subjects that are endangering the idea of a nation state. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yes, because I thought when you brought it up that would I consider myself a transnational author? This was the first thought that I had. And for me, I understand this. I understand how transnational can be a useful concept, but to me, it also affirms the idea of the nation. So if something can be transnational, that means that there are nations between whom this happens. And I would rather like be an anti-national author if possible, or something else. So I'm not between nations, I would say, even though there are many things that describe me, or that accurately one would say that I'm an Austrian author. Like I have an Austrian passport, I'm an Austrian author. But what I wanted to contradict myself,
yes, please,
with, is that the idea of Yugoslavia, of course, itself has this problem within. So what I wanted to say is that one label that I would apply to myself is author in exile, maybe, which is also why I'm very glad that this year I got the award of Austrian Exile Authors Award for my poetry, Exilliteraturpreis, where I'm happy because I feel like, yes, this is accurate. I'm an author in exile, and I'm in exile because the country doesn't exist anymore. Yes. But would I be a Yugoslav national or nationalist, maybe even, if Yugoslavia existed? Hopefully not, but I don't know, because to get back to my research, the Yugoslav partisan film is, of course, a national project, which is trying to, but at the same time kind of acknowledge all these different populaces within. So yeah, this contradiction is already baked into Yugoslavia itself. And I will probably have to deal with this the rest of my life, but somehow it seems productive for now. So
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts on that, if you don't mind. So
please.
Yeah, I think like when you say in exile, and we talked about this award and like the meanings of it. When you say in exile, like in my view, when we talk about Yugoslavia, people from Yugoslavia are sort of like in exile in time, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So yeah, they just you cannot get back in time. So yeah, this is like this exile has a temporal dimension. But yeah, I mean, and speaking of transnational, I mean, we have a lot of debates every time, like everyone at the project and everything. I understand the ways in which you would never say about you that there is anything national about your identity, even in these transnational terms like several nations or whatever. I would go back to like my working definition of transnational and say, yes, like that is not your identity. but this transnational thing is actually how different nation states affected your life in a way that you're producing some literature that is multilingual, that talks about migration, or that. So I would rather say transnational in a way that we cannot ignore these effects, and like we can say, of course, we are against the borders, but then we have razor wires there, and we need to acknowledge them, like,
absolutely,
and fight against them, hopefully. So I agree and disagree, and I think I mean, this can be an endless debate.
Absolutely. But I totally see what you're trying to say, and in that regard, my work is definitely transnational, if we view it like that, because it's marked by this discourse in Austria and Germany of having to speak German, learn German, be perfect at German. The children have to speak it in school, in kindergarten, in the park, like eliminate all other languages. And this discourse that is there until today, but it's transforming, I would say. It was much worse in the 2000s and 2010s. We can definitely find traces of this all throughout my work, where I basically, what I'm saying in all of my poems is, there I learned your stupid German. I'm better at your stupid German than you are. And where did it get me? Nowhere.
Where's my award for this?
Where's my award for that? Where did it get me? It just made me forget my home language, my mother tongue. And this feeling of loss, for example. But also, there is also a playful component to all of that. I'm just highlighting the frustrating part now.
Okay, but you can also regain your language. I mean,
true.
I'm insisting in speaking with you in Serbo-Croatian.
Yes. Yes.
Probably some other people too.
Yes. I'm happy about that.
Okay, maybe we can now switch, like we were in the middle of speaking of your literary career, but then we mentioned poems, but we didn't mention fiction yet. So there is your novel from 2016.
Yes,
Kein
mehr.
Yeah, my German doesn't exist, so...
Lucky you.
But I live in Austria, so we'll see where will that get me. So I'm interested in this novel. It is not translated into English. It is in German. So maybe you can tell us something about it. And then you had sort of like a break, a longer break in writing fiction. And now you're working on the novel called Sachen, if I'm right. So things, stvari. So I want to hear something about your first novel and the one you're working on. You said something about the process of writing, but maybe you can add some more and make a comparison. And
of course.
And why did you get back to novels?
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you. Yes, so my first novel, Kein mehr, as you said, was published in 2016, and it's very much a child of its time. So it is this post-migrant feminist narrative of a failed anthropologist turned local journalist who finds her grandfather's memos or memoir, like handwritten memoir. And her grandfather was in the partisans, and then he documents his life as a later party official and way into the war of the 90s. And so she finds some worrying details in this memoir and decides to travel to her home country, which is Bosnia, to find out more about this mystery. So it is a kind of maybe road trip novel, feminist blog mix. It is very collage-y. I think the label novel is very generous. It has a lot of moving parts. And it is also autobiographical, quite much. And yeah, I have a complicated relationship with this text because it's been such a long time, and I don't know if I would publish it like that again, but it's fine. It's that's probably normal as an author, that you look back on your first steps and then you're like, okay.
Well, you need to start somewhere.
Yeah, one needs to start somewhere. But it was definitely very much in this, at the time, very trendy, confessional style, feminist, maybe also even shocking to some degree, including like bodily things about the female body, that like cutting oneself or menstruation and things like that were until then in at least in popular German speaking literature you couldn't read about that so often. So these were like the markings of that book. And then I just did other things in life. I worked as a journalist. I started this dissertation. I wrote a lot of poetry, and I forgot how to write prose completely. And the first thing, I did write some short stories here and there and essays and things, but like a big prose project for me, I had completely forgotten how to do that. And the first thing that I wrote was a short story with a friend of mine together called Alles ist durchdrungen, which in English would be Everything is permeated, which is an interesting title now that I say it in English, which is about microplastics and how microplastic permeates everything, the world. And then I thought, I love this topic. This is great. I want to write about identity and matter and being, and also migration, but not from this like very obvious standpoint. I wanted to make it more cryptic, because I thought that my first novel was way too literal, and then I thought poetry is a little bit like always like a riddle. And I thought, how can I make prose like a riddle too? And I thought this view on centering a narrative around things, which we don't think of as actors usually, but they are, and you will see when you read my book when it comes out. But centering a narrative around things would give me the exact cryptic, mysterious quality that I wanted. I wanted to make it harder for myself, because a lot has been written on migration and identity in the last 20 years, and I'm thinking like, how can we make it different? How can we shine a new light on this?
Yeah, and maybe, as you said before, maybe you also have like huge respect towards your audience and your readers, showing them that you expect more engagement of them in that sense, like asking them to like answer the riddle.
Absolutely, yes, because that is my experience as a media, as someone who consumes media. I sometimes think, wow, okay, you don't have to hit me over the head with this clue or with this explanation. I got it. And I think that we need to treat our readers like that too. They don't have to be fed everything, spoon-fed everything.
I agree. You mentioned now this break was because you were doing other things. So we were talking briefly about your PhD. We mentioned your journalist career. Maybe if you want, I would like to hear something about your journalist career, but also like your presence in public sphere in Austria. I saw somewhere that you identify as Austria's first shitposter.
Yes, proudly so.
So yeah, maybe journalism and social media presence as our next topic.
Yes, sure. So I started working as a journalist, I think in 2011 or 12. And I still do. I mean, I don't write so much anymore. I only write cultural critique and reports and essayistic stuff. But I used to be like a day-to-day journalist and report on the news, especially regarding migration and politics in Austria. And that went along with a social media presence, because at that time it was important as a journalist, and especially as a freelance journalist, which I was, to be seen, to be heard, to be present on Twitter, as it was called.
Which time we are talking about, maybe for
2012 onwards. What I realize now, what I did then, I did not know that I was doing it then. So what I realize now, what I did was I had this brand, or I branded myself as the enfant terrible of Austrian journalism, as the loud and unapologetic migrant female voice who would not back down, who was not impressed by authority or seniority, who would start fights with older journalists, white men, of course. Who would not make her tone professional for the sake of sounding smart or whatever, and who would say it like it is somehow. So that was my brand. And that worked fantastically, but it also had its downsides, because at that time there were, I don't know if anyone knows even about this, but there were these anonymous groups, and what was it called? Gamergate. So there were really huge online campaigns started from basically incel message boards that at that time were not called incels, but now that we look
now we're
back on
opening completely very big topic that
I know.
we cannot go into.
No, we won't go
right?
into it, but I will just say that this is also something that started in the 2010s, and of course I soon became a target of theirs.
Yeah. So let's say these online bullying groups, maybe even.
Yes, exactly. And that was very disturbing and also life-threatening somewhat, and frightening. So I was one of Austria's first and main shitposters on Twitter, but I also lived with the backlash of that.
Gained a lot of enemies.
Gained a lot of enemies, exactly. But to go back to what I wrote about, which was important, so this kind of erratic behavior of mine also brought a lot of eyes to my work. And hopefully some also remember me for that, and not just for telling, I don't know, Armin Wolf or Florian Klenk that they're stupid and they can fuck off or something like that. But I wrote about police repression, about discrimination in all forms, in schools, in bureaucracy. I was clearly sympathetic and solidary. I always also as a journalist showed my solidarity with the anti-fascist movements in Austria, the refugees welcome movement, things of that nature. And this was good work that I was doing, but at that time it needed this radical packaging maybe. And looking back, it's very interesting what I did there.
Well, very brave as well.
I hope so. Yes, I'm not sure. Let's say.
Okay, but now when we had this conversation about aspects of you, like your different identities, professional and personal. I see. Like,
I feel disintegrated.
But not actually. What I wanted to say is that I see that all of these aspects are speaking to each other, and they are pretty well connected, like in terms of your topics, like political views, views on class,
on gender.
So I think all of these things are pretty coherent in your work and your public life, let's say. But then there is this one thing that I told you I want to come back to it, that for me, it really fits very strangely.
Yes.
So you studied physics. So I'm interested in that part. How do you see it fit with everything else about you? And also, I mean, I do see a connection in some ways. So you are the co-editor of the FemPower volume,
yes,
which is a guide for aspiring female scientists. So I can see this feminist and gender aspect to it. But I'm just like, as someone who doesn't know anything about physics, I would like to hear you were good at maths, but like how do you see it now from this perspective when you decided to go the other way?
I'm so happy about this question because I usually never get to talk about physics, and I love it so much. And it's also like a great heartbreak of my life, maybe the biggest even. So the plan for me after I graduated high school was to study physics and to become a physicist. I was 100% convinced that was what I was going to do. And I really do love physics, and I'm really very good at math. But then, again, class and gender issues hit me around the head because I came to the university and I saw that there were, in my class, or the year that I started, there were maybe 200 students. And like if there were 5 girls, maybe, you could count them on one hand. And there were like 0 girls that were glamorous and interested in fashion and standing out like I did. Like I stood out like a sore thumb at that university. And even the teachers sometimes commented on that. So like when I would walk into a room for a class, they would be like, "Are you sure you belong here?" And they seriously would say that to me. And when you're like 18 or 19, that was like hard to hear. And then, of course, your male colleagues are not, when they do a project with you, they are kind of not convinced that you can do this because you're wearing eyeliner and your nails are painted. And how could that work? So today it's quite different, I think. So we have lots of women in science, and we have seen also in pop culture so many examples of amazing women in science, but this was 2008. And also physics is a full-time job. Like you cannot study physics and work, but I had to because I'm from a working class family, which of course made it impossible to me to study it the way that you're supposed to. And like after a few years, I just gave up. I used to work many different jobs, but then settled into whatever I could sell of my writing, and soon became a journalist. And I just couldn't sustain myself doing work and study physics at the same time. And then the journalism career kicked off, and I just stopped with physics. But just to say how it fits into everything else and things about physics is so fantastic because it's mostly wondering about the complexity and beauty of the world. And this is what poets do all the time. This is the same thing. Maybe I'm trying now to make it fit into everything else, like a round peg into a square hole or square peg into a round hole. I don't know.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. But to me, it's very much the same. Physics is like, wow, what is this? And how does it work? And this is what poetry is and what literature is mostly, sometimes with the inner world as well, or with feelings, but it's just an amazement about the natural world. And yeah, I really miss this part of me, because after so many years, I've also forgotten so many things. But I do kind of always go back to physics, math, and also geology and other natural sciences for word material. So I like to nip a few words here and there from the word catalogs and use it in our cultural studies or literature studies world.
Well, yes, I think this world gains so much by having you here and not in physics.
Thank you.
Even though I really get angry when I hear these stories, but I mean there is no but. Yeah, I can get really angry, and I am grateful to you that you shared this experience with me and with our audience. So the fight is not over.
No.
I'm sometimes afraid it never will be, but
in some ways it's a huge failure for me as well. And maybe if I told my younger self, she would be disappointed. But I don't know. Still something positive came out of it in the end. But if I could, would I go back and finish physics? Probably. Maybe I'll do it when I retire or something.
Well, there is still time.
I would be like a very glamorous lady in a fur coat with Cruella de Vil hair and be like, now I really don't belong here, but I don't care.
I think this is the attitude.
Yes, I also think so.
We should start practicing all the time. We don't have much more time. But
oh my God, it's so fast.
Yeah, so fast, but really beautiful. I'm really happy that we managed to go through all of the topics that I was planning to go today with you. Of course, we're going to have a bunch of other topics as well, but maybe we can make another episode some other time. We'll see. So, but for now,
I would be honored. It was so much fun. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me. And let's talk more. And for our audience, listen to our podcast with also other great guests. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
This podcast is powered by the European Union and the Central European University Library.